The 2026 Formula One regulations represent the most sweeping overhaul the sport has introduced in over a decade. Every team arrived at the Bahrain International Circuit for pre-season testing having built a car from a near-blank sheet of paper. The new rules rewrote both the power unit formula and the aerodynamic philosophy simultaneously, a combination the sport has not attempted since 2014. New regulations on that scale do not reward the timid. They punish the unprepared and expose the ambitious. What unfolded across 3 days in the Bahraini desert confirmed that 2026 will be unlike any season that came before it. Under the new power unit framework, the electrical component of each car's hybrid system now contributes approximately 50% of total power output, a sharp increase from the previous era. The combustion engine remains, but the electrical deployment strategy and the MGUK architecture are now decisive performance variables. Simultaneously, the aerodynamic regulations mandated a shift to active aero, with bodywork that physically adjusts its shape between low drag and high downforce configurations. The cars are also physically smaller. Every dimension of performance has changed at once. Get this wrong and a team isn't just slow, it's irrelevant for years. On the opening day of testing, the RB21 posted the fastest straight-line speed reading of any car in the entire test session. The speed trap figure was not marginally quicker. It was record-breaking by a notable margin, and it generated immediate discussion in the paddock. Rivals checked their data, engineers reviewed their simulations. Red Bull had arrived with something that was moving through the air at a rate that nobody else was matching. Then, almost immediately, Red Bull vanished from the timing screens. Their lap times became unremarkable. Their pace runs were short and inconclusive. The team completed laps in seemingly low-fuel configurations, posted no representative race simulations, and gave the wider field almost nothing meaningful to benchmark against. The combination of that record straight-line speed followed by deliberate obscurity on overall lap time produced one of the most analyzed mysteries of the test. The technical explanations range across several possibilities. The simplest is straightforward sandbagging, running fuel loads designed to produce spectacular speed trap readings while carrying excess weight through the rest of the lap. A second theory is more concerning for Red Bull, a base car that generates high straight-line speed precisely because it is producing insufficient downforce, meaning the car is genuinely fast in a straight line but uncompetitive through medium and high-speed corners. A third interpretation focuses on the active aero system. If the RB21's deployment of its movable aerodynamic elements is operating in a way that other teams have not yet unlocked, the speed trap numbers could reflect a genuine strategic aero advantage that simply does not translate directly into a lap time during controlled testing. There is no clean resolution to this story before Melbourne. Red Bull either have something brilliant or something they're desperately trying to hide. And the sport will not know which interpretation is correct until qualifying laps are posted in Australia. Before testing even began, Mercedes arrived under scrutiny. Rival teams and their technical representatives had been circulating concerns in the weeks prior to Bahrain. Concerns centered on a specific aspect of how the Mercedes power unit is configured under the 2026 regulations. The allegation is technical but consequential, that Mercedes has identified and exploited an ambiguity in the rules governing energy deployment and MGUK architecture that allows their power unit to operate in a manner others cannot legally replicate. In plain terms, the accusation is that Mercedes found a loophole in the new power unit regulations that enables them to deploy electrical energy either more aggressively, more efficiently, or across a wider operating window than the regulations strictly intended to allow. In a year where the power unit contributes roughly half of total car performance, even a modest electrical deployment advantage translates directly into lap time and race pace. This is not the first time Mercedes has arrived at the start of a new regulatory cycle with a technical interpretation that unsettled their competitors. In 2020, the team introduced the dual-axis steering system, the DAS, which allowed drivers to alter front-wheel toe by pushing and pulling the steering column. It was legal, it was scrutinized heavily, it was eventually banned for 2021. The parallel is not lost on the paddock. Mercedes has a documented history of finding the edges of regulations in ways that are uncomfortable for rivals, but technically defensible. The FIA has not confirmed that the Mercedes configuration is legal. It has not ruled it illegal either. That silence, with Melbourne weeks away, creates a situation of structured uncertainty that will define the first part of the 2026 season. If the configuration is declared legal, Mercedes holds a structural advantage that other power unit suppliers cannot easily replicate mid-season. If it is ruled illegal, Mercedes faces a potentially race-ending power unit restructure in the opening weeks of the championship. The FIA hasn't said yes, they haven't said no. And Melbourne is weeks away. When the SF26 rolled onto the circuit, other drivers noticed the rear wing before they noticed the lap times. Multiple drivers, upon seeing the Ferrari rear wing configuration for the first time, described it as appearing physically broken or incorrectly assembled. It did not look like any other rear wing in the paddock. The profile, the geometry, the interaction between the main plane and flap, all of it was sufficiently unconventional that paddock observers initially assumed something had gone wrong during car preparation. Nothing had gone wrong. Ferrari had deliberately engineered a rear wing, unlike anything currently operating in Formula One. The working theory among rival technical teams is that the wing's unusual shape relates to how it interacts with the 2026 active aerodynamic system. Under the new regulations, the rear wing can transition between configurations. Ferrari's approach appears to prioritize an extreme differential between the high downforce and low drag states, maximizing the gain from each transition rather than seeking a conventional balance. The potential drag reduction through the DRS equivalent system could be significant if the concept works as intended. The lap time data from Ferrari's test was neither uniformly fast nor definitively slow. Ferrari completed a reasonable volume of running, and their long-run pace was not alarming. What remained unclear is whether the rear wing concept is producing the aerodynamic efficiency gains the design implies, or whether it is an experimental configuration that Ferrari intend to develop further before the season opener. The team disclosed nothing about the wing's function or intent throughout testing. Either Ferrari are geniuses, or they're going to qualify at the back with the world's most interesting-looking car. No signing in recent Formula One history generated more expectation than Adrian Newey's move to Aston Martin. Newey is the most decorated technical mind the sport has produced. The architect behind Red Bull's 4 consecutive Constructors' Championships between 2010 and 2013, and the 2022 and 2023 titles as well. His arrival at Silverstone was treated not merely as a personnel change, but as a transformation of the team's competitive ceiling. Bahrain was the first public evidence of what that partnership might produce. The evidence was not encouraging. The AMR26 spent significant portions of all 3 days in the garage. Aston Martin barely completed a full day of running across the test, accumulating a lap count that left them with far less representative data than every competitive team requires before a season opener. The issues were reliability-based, but multiple technical problems interrupted the program and prevented the team from executing their planned test schedule. The car did not crash. Go! It did not produce alarming data when it was running. It simply kept stopping. There is an important technical context here. The AMR26's development timeline means that Newey's direct design influence on this specific car is limited. Formula One cars are conceived and largely locked down 12 to 18 months before they run. Newey joined Aston Martin in early 2024, meaning his contribution to the 2026 car is a partial one. Structural input and concept guidance rather than ground-up authorship. The car that struggled through Bahrain testing is not definitively his car. The 2027 machine will be the first true measure of what Newey at Aston Martin can produce. That nuance does not resolve the immediate problem. Aston Martin's owners, including Lawrence Stroll, have invested billions into building an infrastructure designed to compete at the front of the grid. Newey's genius doesn't come with a fast-forward button, but Aston Martin's owners might not have the patience to wait. Beyond the individual team stories, Bahrain testing raised structural questions about the 2026 regulations themselves. The active aerodynamic system, which is central to the new rules' promise of better racing, produced inconsistent behavior across multiple teams. Several drivers reported that their cars handled differently on successive laps under apparently identical conditions, suggesting the active aero transitions are not yet calibrated with the precision required for racecraft. Tire degradation patterns were also unpredictable. The Pirelli compounds are interacting with the new aerodynamic load profiles in ways that did not fully match preseason simulations. Multiple drivers across different teams described their cars as nervous and unpredictable, particularly at low-speed corners where the interaction between mechanical grip and active aero is most complex. The prospect of managing those characteristics across a 5-7 lap race distance in Melbourne is a concern that engineers across the grid are working against. The structural aim of the 2026 regulations, producing cars that can follow each other more closely and generate more overtaking, has not yet been validated. Early data from Bahrain suggested the wake turbulence characteristics of the new cars may not be as clean as the regulation writers projected. Two cars from 2009 and 2014, both of which saw chaotic opening tests, produced competitive racing within the first few rounds. That precedent offers a degree of reassurance. Both of those regulation sets also had fundamental issues that persisted through the season. Not every problem identified in testing disappears before the first race. The Australian Grand Prix at Albert Park will provide the first unfiltered performance data of the 2026 season. Qualifying laps cannot be disguised by fuel loads or program management. Race pace cannot be obscured by selective running. Several questions remain entirely open heading into Melbourne. Will Red Bull's true pace emerge and confirm they are the class of the field? Or will their speed trap numbers prove to be an isolated data point rather than evidence of a complete package? Will the FIA issue a ruling on the Mercedes power unit configuration before the first race? Or will the championship begin with the technical legality of the fastest engine on the grid still unresolved? Can Ferrari's unconventional rear wing survive the demands of race conditions, the curb strikes, the thermal cycles, the aerodynamic stress of sustained high-speed running, and deliver the performance gains the concept implies? And will Aston Martin simply complete a full race distance without a reliability failure that has defined their testing program? Among the teams that ran cleanly and accumulated meaningful data, McLaren and Ferrari showed the most consistent long-run performance. Red Bull's concealment strategy makes any assessment of their true competitiveness speculative. Mercedes ran with pace but carries the regulatory question mark over their power unit into the season. The dark horse candidate most worth watching is Williams, who completed a significant lap count and whose data suggested a car that is at minimum capable of competing for points from the opening round. The 2026 Formula One season arrives with more unresolved technical and regulatory questions than any championship in the modern era. Red Bull clocked record speed and disappeared. Mercedes is fighting a loophole accusation that the FIA has neither confirmed nor dismissed. Ferrari debuted a rear wing that other drivers thought was broken. And Aston Martin, with Adrian Newey on their books, could barely complete a full day of testing. Melbourne will begin to provide answers. Whether those answers clarify the championship picture or deepen the uncertainty is the question the sport now carries into the first race of a year, unlike any that preceded it.